The coffee hit her face before she even saw it coming. Hot, bitter, humiliating. It splashed across Amara's cheek and dripped down her neck, soaking into the collar of the second-hand sweater she'd ironed that morning, because she had nothing else clean. Because the laundromat was $3.50 a load, and this week she'd had to choose between detergent and Kofi's yogurt pouches. She'd chosen the yogurt, obviously. He was 2 years old. He couldn't exactly understand why Mommy smelled like yesterday. The entire student lounge at Meridian University went silent. Not the kind of silent that meant people were horrified. The kind of silent that meant people were recording. Amara didn't move. She stood with her notes pressed to her chest, coffee dripping off her chin, and she did the only thing 3 years of surviving had taught her to do. She breathed, slow, controlled. One breath in, one breath out. Don't let them see it break you. Don't give anyone in this room the satisfaction of watching Amara Osei fall apart at 7 in the morning before her pharmaceutical chemistry exam. "Oh my God, I'm so clumsy," said Sloane Calloway, pressing one perfectly manicured hand to her lips. Her two friends, both wearing the kind of effortless blonde ponytails that required 40 minutes and a full styling team, giggled into their iced lattes. "I didn't even see you standing there. You're just so." Sloane tilted her head, performing confusion. "Small." Amara looked at her, really looked at her. She knew this face. She'd hoped never to see it again. Sloane Calloway, younger sister of Bryce Calloway. Same pale blue eyes, same inherited cruelty, same smile that had never once been earned. "It was an accident," Amara said quietly. Not because she believed it, because Kofi was at home with Miss Gloria and she needed to graduate in 18 months, and a criminal record for assault, even justified assault, would torch everything she'd spent 3 years rebuilding from nothing. Of course it was. Sloane set her empty cup on the table beside her, the one that had apparently just been accidentally poured. "Although honestly, Amara, you should be more careful about where you stand. People can't see you." She paused, letting the next part land clean and deliberate. "You're very forgettable." The lounge remained perfectly, awfully still. 20, maybe 25 students watching. Some with phones half raised. Some just watching with the particular fascination people reserve for car accidents and public breakdowns, hoping something worse would happen, relieved it wasn't happening to them. Amara reached for the napkin dispenser on the counter beside her. A hand got there first. She looked up. He was tall. That was the first thing she registered. Tall, broad-shouldered, in a coat that cost more than her monthly rent. Korean, sharp-jawed, dark hair pushed back from a face that was almost distractingly structured. He was looking at Sloane with an expression Amara had never seen directed at someone like Sloane Calloway before. Contempt. Absolute, unhurried contempt. "You have 30 seconds, he said. His voice was low, conversational almost. The kind of calm that made the back of Amara's neck prickle. Because she'd learned the hard way that the most dangerous people were never the ones who shouted. To apologize, Genuine blinked. "Excuse me, do you know who? Sloane Calloway, sister of Bryce Calloway, whose father, Senator Gerald Calloway, is currently facing federal indictment on 6 counts of financial misconduct." He tilted his head slightly. "The hearing is in 11 weeks. Imagine how a video of his daughter assaulting a black single mother would play in Discovery." Sloane's face went white so fast Amara almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That was an accident. Security cameras don't understand accidents. He nodded toward the blinking red eye in the corner of the ceiling. "And neither do juries." He looked at her the way a person looks at something they're deciding whether to step over or step on. "Apologize, mean it." The silence in the room had changed texture. It was no longer the silence of voyeurs. It was the silence of witnesses. Sloane's throat moved. Her friends had already taken 3 careful steps backward. "I'm sorry," Sloane said, and her voice came out strangled, smaller than Amara had ever heard it. "It wasn't an accident. I shouldn't have done it." "Leave," she left. Fast. Her friends scattered after her like birds from a gunshot. The room exhaled. Slowly, conversations resumed. Phones disappeared. The world pretended it had never stopped. Amara still hadn't moved. The man turned to her, and the ferocity drained from his face like water, replaced by something so careful and deliberate she almost didn't recognize it. Softness. He pulled a folded cloth from his breast pocket, an actual handkerchief, which nobody carried anymore, and held it out. "May I?" he asked. Amara stared at him. "I can do it myself, I know." He didn't move, just held it out, patient. "I'm asking." She took the handkerchief from him because it was either that or stand here dripping for another 30 seconds, and she had an exam to get to. She pressed it to her face. It smelled like sandalwood and something cold and clean, like winter air through an open window. Thank you, she said stiffly. For what you did. It needed doing. You didn't have to. I wanted to. He was watching her the way no one watched her anymore. Not assessing, not pitying, not calculating what she was worth. Just watching. You know her brother, Amara said, short, final. She did not want to explain Bryce Calloway to a stranger at 7 in the morning, with coffee drying on her neck. The man nodded once, like that explained everything. You have an exam, he said. She paused. How do you know that? Pharmaceutical chemistry, 9 a.m. He said it without hesitation, without a trace of apology. You're going to be late if you leave now. A chill moved through her that had nothing to do with the cold air. Who are you? Jaewon Choi. He said it simply, like it was just a name, like it wasn't a name that would mean something to her the moment she Googled it. And you're Amara Osei, you're 24. You have a 2-year-old son named Kofi, you work 2 jobs. You're maintaining a 4.0 GPA, and you eat graham crackers with peanut butter at midnight when you're studying because you ran out of Nutella 3 weeks ago and haven't had time to replace it. The room felt very, very small. That, Amara said, is terrifying. I prefer thorough. Those are not the same thing. Something shifted in his expression. Not amusement, exactly. More like recognition. Like she'd given the exact answer he expected, and the answer had confirmed something. No, he said, they're not. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a card. Clean white, embossed lettering. He set it on the counter beside her. Go take your exam. She looked at the card. She looked at him. I don't know you, she said. Not yet. He stepped back, giving her space, and there was something deliberate about it. A man who understood that taking up space was a choice. But I'd like to change that, if you're willing. Amara picked up her notes. Her hands were steady. That was the thing about surviving this long. The trembling stopped eventually. You learned to shake on the inside. She looked at him one more time, because she couldn't help it. Because something about this man made the survival instincts she'd been sharpening for 3 years go very, very quiet. Why, she asked. Jaewon Choi looked at her for a long moment. Because 3 years ago, he said, a woman was standing in the rain at a bus stop on Callaway Street in Hartwell City. 6 months pregnant, soaked through, holding textbooks to her chest like they were something worth protecting. I offered her an umbrella, he paused. She made me prove I wasn't dangerous before she'd take it. Another pause, quieter. I've been looking for her ever since. The air left Amara's lungs. She knew that umbrella. It was in her closet. Navy blue, wooden handle. She'd kept it for 3 years because she couldn't explain why. Because in the darkest season of her life, the only moment that had felt like evidence of human decency was 30 seconds at a rainy bus stop with a stranger who hadn't asked for anything. That was you, she breathed. Yes, she didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She picked up her notes, tucked them under her arm, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. My exam ends at 10:15, she said without turning around. I know, he said quietly. She left. She aced the exam. She didn't know how. Her brain had been running on the fumes of 3 hours of sleep and a single shot of espresso, and for the entire 50 minutes of the test, she kept seeing his face, the angle of his jaw. The way he'd stood between her and Sloane Calloway like he'd put himself there on purpose, like he'd been waiting for exactly that moment, which she was beginning to understand he had. She sat with that on the walk back to her apartment. The card was in her pocket, Jaewon Choi, CEO Choi Biomedical Group. The address was Hartwell City, 43rd floor. She Googled it on her phone while waiting for the crosswalk. The Wikipedia article loaded first. She stopped walking. Choi Biomedical Group, founded 2018. Revenue $2.1 billion. Specialization, pharmaceutical development and distribution. Founder and CEO Jaewon Choi, 30. Described variously as a visionary, a disruptor, and in one particularly colorful Forbes profile, the man most likely to either revolutionize healthcare or acquire it entirely. He ran a pharmaceutical empire. And she had spent the last semester telling anyone who'd listen that the pharmaceutical industry was structurally designed to keep sick people poor. She stared at the Wikipedia photo. Sharp suit, controlled expression, dark eyes that gave nothing away. She kept walking. Kofi was asleep when she got home, sprawled across his toddler bed with one arm flung over his dinosaur stuffed animal and his mouth slightly open, and Amara stood in the doorway for a full minute just watching him breathe. This was the thing that made all of it. The double shifts, the calloused hands, the studying until her eyes burned. Make sense. This tiny, perfect, impossible person who had come into the world screaming and immediately made everything both harder and more worth it. She went to her own room and sat on the edge of her bed. 3 years ago, she'd been 21. Junior year at Crestfield University, biomedical engineering, full scholarship. The first person in her family to make it this far, and she'd known it, and it had felt like both a gift and a weight she couldn't put down. She'd been working 2 jobs even then, tutoring in the campus center on weekdays, waitressing downtown on weekends, and somewhere in between all of that, she had made the worst decision of her life. Bryce Calloway. He'd found her in the library. Of course he had. That was how men like Bryce operated. They found you in the places you thought were safe. They made you feel discovered instead of targeted. He was charming and relentless, and he'd told her she was extraordinary, and she had been 21 and lonely and exhausted, and she'd believed him because she'd wanted to, and sometimes that's all it takes. 4 months, that was all it had lasted. When she told him she was pregnant, he'd looked at her the way people look at a bill they didn't expect, and he'd said, "There are options." And she'd said, "I know my options," and he'd said, "Then use one." And she'd looked at this man she thought had seen something real in her, and realized he'd just seen something real that he didn't want. The next week, he'd filed a complaint with the university claiming harassment. Her campus job had been quietly terminated. Her scholarship had been under review for a month that felt like a year. She'd dropped out 3 months before her due date, moved back to her mother's apartment, and spent the first 2 months of Kofi's life figuring out how to survive on almost nothing. Her mother, Daisy, had tried. She'd always tried. But she'd been sick for years. Managing type 2 diabetes on a budget that didn't leave room for insulin that cost what it cost in this country, rationing doses in ways she knew she shouldn't. And by the time Kofi was 18 months old, Adiz's OC was gone. Amara had held her mother's hand in that hospital room. She had made 2 promises. One to her mother, "I will make something of myself." One to herself, "I will make sure no other family has to lose someone like this." She had re-enrolled at Meridian University 6 months after the funeral. She had found Ms. Gloria, her neighbor on the 2nd floor who adored Kofi and charged almost nothing and refused to hear otherwise. She had gotten back to work. And now a billionaire CEO who had once lent her an umbrella in the rain was standing in campus lounges dismantling women who humiliated her, and apparently knowing her midnight snack preferences. Amara looked at the card in her hand for a long moment. Then she took out her phone and typed a message to the number on the back. "This is Amara. I don't know what you want. But if you're serious about talking, I have conditions." The reply came in under a minute. "Name them." She smiled. "Just slightly, just once. Tomorrow, coffee, a public place. I talk, you listen first. No more information you shouldn't have." Another 30 seconds. Agreed. "There's a place called Harrow's on 5th. 7 a.m. I'll be there before you." She looked at the message for a long time. Then she put the phone down, went to check on Kofi, and told herself very firmly that she was only going because she deserved answers. Not because the memory of that umbrella had lived in her chest for 3 years like a splinter she'd never been able to remove. Not because of that at all. End of batch 1. Approximately 2,100 words shown. Full batch to 3,000 follows below. She was at Harrow's on 5th at 6:58. He was already there. Of course he was. Jae-won Choi sat at a corner table, not the conspicuous kind, not a power position designed to be seen, but the kind that let him see every door, every entrance, every person who walked in. He was in dark trousers and a gray shirt, no tie, collar open. He looked like money dressed down deliberately. He had 2 coffees on the table, Americano. Amara stopped when she saw it. "How did you know?" she asked, sitting down. "You ordered it at the campus lounge yesterday, before the incident." His expression didn't change. "You said, and I quote, 'I need to taste my heartbeat.' You were there before everything happened." "Yes. You were watching me. I was looking for you," he said. There was a difference in his tone. Not defensiveness, just precision. Like the distinction mattered to him. "I've been looking for you for 3 years. When I finally found you, I didn't want to approach you in a way that felt." He paused, selecting the word, "sudden." "So you enrolled in executive classes at my university. The program supports continuing education. I find academia stimulating. You hate school." The Forbes profile from 2023 called your MBA experience institutional torture. Something changed in his face. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. "You Googled me." "Obviously I Googled you. And you run a pharmaceutical company worth $2 billion, and you're at a coffee shop at 7 in the morning watching me drink a 4-shot Americano." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "So talk." He talked. He told her about the conference in Hartwell City 3 years ago. About stepping outside to escape the performative networking. And seeing her at the bus stop soaked through. One hand on her belly and her chin lifted against the rain, Like defiance was a posture she'd been born into. He told her about the umbrella, about the way she'd looked at him. Not with gratitude, not immediately, but with careful, measured assessment. A woman deciding in real time whether he was safe, and how she'd made him prove it before she accepted anything. 30 seconds, he said. And I felt more in those 30 seconds than I had in 10 years of building something that was supposed to matter. Amara looked at him over her coffee cup. That's a lot to put on a stranger at a bus stop. I know. I was 6 months pregnant and soaked. I wasn't exactly at peak presentation. No. His voice was quiet. You were better than that. You were real. He looked at her steadily. I've met people, politicians, executives, people with extraordinary amounts of power and resources who fall apart at the first sign of pressure. You were standing in the rain with nothing, and you were still standing. The silence between them was different from the silence in the lounge yesterday. That silence had been the held breath of an audience. This one was something else. Amara recognized it the way you recognize a smell from childhood. Something you didn't know you'd missed until it was in front of you again. Being seen, not pitied, not assessed, not managed, seen. I have a son, she said, Kofi, 2 years old. He likes dinosaurs, specifically the Brachiosaurus, though he mispronounces it Brachiosaurus. And you have decided this is correct. Amara blinked. How do you know that? Social media. You posted a video 14 months ago. He's holding a figurine and you're off camera correcting him, and then immediately agreeing with his version. Something in Jaewon's expression softened in a way that looked almost involuntary. It was 3 seconds long. I've watched it 11 times. Amara's chest did something complicated. That's still creepy, she said. It is, he agreed. You know that. Yes, and you don't plan to stop. I plan to stop collecting information about you without your knowledge, he said. Now that you're here, I'd rather you just tell me things, in exchange for which I will answer any question you ask, honestly, without diplomatic softening. He looked at her directly. What do you want to know? She had 100 questions. She had been assembling them since yesterday. She asked the only one that felt like it mattered right now. Why me? She said, actually genuinely, why me? You could have any woman in any room. Women who match your world, your status, your everything. Why are you sitting at a table at 7 in the morning trying to convince a broke engineering student with a toddler and a dead car and a 3-year grudge against your entire industry to give you a chance? Jaewon Choi was quiet for a moment. Because every woman who matches my world, he said slowly, has been shaped by it. By what it rewards. By what it wants from them. And they perform accordingly. His eyes didn't leave hers. You have no idea what you're worth in a room like mine. Not because you're oblivious. Because you've never been in one. And the second you walk into it, you will change the temperature of it. You always do, he exhaled. I felt that at a bus stop in the rain. I've been trying to feel it again for 3 years. The coffee was getting cold. Amara set it down. I've been hurt, she said, flatly. By a man with money and connections and a smile I believed in. He nearly destroyed my life. He cost me my scholarship, my mother's last good years, everything I'd built. And I rebuilt it alone, and I am not going to watch it burn down again. I know what Bryce Calloway did to you. Then you understand why I'm sitting here, with every wall I have up. Yes. He didn't look away. I understand it, and I'm not asking you to take them down. I'm asking you to watch whether I earn it, slowly. On your timeline. With Kofi's well-being as the line I am not permitted to cross under any circumstances. He paused. I mean that. If at any point this puts your son at risk, his happiness, his security, his sense of the world, you tell me and I stop. Full stop. No negotiation. Amara studied him. 3 years of armor. 3 years of deciding that the only people she could trust were Kofi and Ms. Gloria and her own 2 hands. 3 years of rebuilding herself from the rubble of a man who'd said she wasn't enough. Coffee, she said. That's all this is for now, just coffee. Jaewon Choi nodded once. I can work with coffee, he said. The thing about letting someone in, even slightly, even just for coffee, was that it created a crack. And cracks, Amara had learned the hard way, had a way of becoming doors before you realized you'd left them open. She told herself she was being careful. She was meeting him twice a week, always in public, always with a hard stop at a time she'd set in advance. She asked questions and he answered them. Every single one, without the diplomatic softening he'd promised to leave out. She asked about his parents. Dead. Car accident. He was 12. His grandmother Sol had raised him with high expectations and very little warmth, and he said this without bitterness, just factual accounting. She asked about the company, built from a seed fund he'd won in a university competition at 19, scaled by a combination of obsessive work ethic and, as he put it, an accurate read of which pharmaceutical categories were being criminally underserved. She asked why he'd never married. He said he hadn't met anyone who made him want to. Until a bus stop, she said. Until a bus stop, he agreed, without any self-consciousness about it at all, which somehow made it worse. A man who was embarrassed about this, she could have managed. A man who simply stated it like a fact that had been true for 3 years and had no interest in pretending otherwise. That man was a different problem entirely. Kofi met him on a Saturday. It wasn't planned. Or rather, it wasn't planned by Amara. She was beginning to understand that very little in Jae-won Choi's world was actually unplanned. They'd agreed on brunch at a family-friendly place near her apartment, and she'd brought Kofi because the playdate had been canceled and she had nobody else on short notice. And she'd warned Jae-won in a text that this was not an introduction, this was logistics, and he had replied understood in a way that somehow communicated he understood no such thing. Kofi took one look at Jae-won across the table and said, "With the unfiltered authority of a 2-year-old, you're big." "I am," Jae-won said seriously. "Like a brachiosaurus," Kofi said. "The correct pronunciation," Jae-won said, glancing at Amara, "is brachiosaurus, actually." Kofi pointed at him with a piece of toast. "He knows." Amara pressed her fingers to her mouth. She would not smile. She absolutely refused to smile. She was smiling. She hated herself a little for it. By the end of brunch, Kofi had climbed onto the chair beside Jae-won and was explaining, at great length and with considerable inaccuracy, the dietary habits of long-necked dinosaurs. Jae-won listened with his full attention the way he listened to everything. Like the information being delivered was exactly as important as anything in a boardroom. And Amara watched this from across the table and felt the crack in her chest get wider. "Don't," she told herself. But it was already too late for don't. It had probably been too late since the handkerchief. 3 weeks in, her car died again. This time it was on the highway, in the rain, with Kofi asleep in his car seat and her phone at 4% battery. She'd called the roadside service, been told 45 minutes, and then called Jae-won because he was the next number in her recent calls and she was cold and tired, and the rain was coming down in sheets against the windows. "Where are you?" he asked. No preamble. No, "are you okay" first. She gave him the highway and the mile marker. He was there in 18 minutes, not in a car service or a chauffeured vehicle. He drove himself, in something dark and understated, and almost certainly worth more than her apartment. And he pulled up behind her with the hazards on, and got out in the rain without an umbrella and came directly to her window. "You don't have a coat," she said when she opened the door. "You needed to get home." He was already soaked through, which seemed not to register as a problem to him. "Kofi still asleep?" "Yes, good." He reached past her and took her keys. "I'll have someone tow this in the morning. Come on." "I can wait for roadside." "Amara," he said her name quietly, just her name. And something about the way he said it. No frustration, no impatience, just a kind of steady absolute certainty, made the argument dissolve before she'd finished building it. She got out of the car. She unclipped Kofi's car seat and transferred her sleeping son into Jae-won's car, and Kofi didn't wake up, just resettled against the fabric with a small sigh. And Avura stood in the rain watching this man she'd been keeping at careful arm's length adjust a blanket around her sleeping son with the kind of gentleness that didn't look performed. She got in the car. They drove in silence for 5 minutes. "Thank you," she said finally. "I told you I'd show up," he said. "This is what showing up looks like." She looked at him in profile. The rain on the windshield made the highway lights fracture into gold. "You're going to keep doing this." "Yes, showing up, making it harder to keep the distance." "I'm not trying to eliminate the distance." He kept his eyes on the road. "I'm trying to demonstrate that the distance doesn't have to mean alone." A pause. "You can have walls and still let someone stand outside them." "I'm not asking to come in. I'm asking to be present." Amara turned to look out the passenger window. Outside, the rain moved sideways. The highway lights blurred. She thought about Bryce Calloway, and the way he had stood outside her walls too in the beginning, looking patient and sincere and wanting nothing. She thought about how wrong she had been. But Bryce had never stood in the rain without a coat. Bryce had never adjusted a blanket around a sleeping toddler who wasn't his. Bryce had never said, "I'm not asking to come in." Bryce had taken, quietly, consistently, and then all at once. This felt different. She hated that it felt different, because different wasn't the same as safe. But it felt different. "Next Tuesday," she said, still looking out the window. "Kofi has a checkup in the morning and I have a study group in the afternoon. I have a 2-hour window in between. I know a diner near the pediatric clinic that has the best plantains in Hartwell City." She heard rather than saw the change in his breathing. "I'll be there," he said. The building maintenance situation happened in week 4. Amara's apartment heat had been inconsistent for 6 months. Not broken, not completely, not officially, which was how her landlord had been navigating the conversation every time she filed a maintenance request. It worked enough of the time that he could claim functionality. It failed enough of the time that Kofi slept in 2 sweaters between November and March. She mentioned it to Jaewon, off-handedly. A complaint, not a request. She was very deliberate about the distinction because she was not going to become a woman who was rescued. She was a woman who solved her own problems and always had been. He said, "I'll look into it." She said, "It's fine, it's manageable. I didn't tell you so you could fix it." He said, "I know." 2 weeks later, she came home to a brand new HVAC unit and a letter informing her that due to an administrative processing error, her rent had been adjusted to a nominal maintenance fee pending a long-term review. "You bought the building," she said on the phone. "I made an investment in a residential property," he said. Jaewon. The previous owner was in financial distress and under-maintaining 11 units in a building with 12. It was a sound acquisition. "You bought my building. The tenants in all 12 units now have functional heating, hot water, and the maintenance requests that had been ignored for over a year are being addressed." A pause. "Also your rent. I noticed. Too much? $1 a month. Administrative error." "That is not what administrative error means. Amara." His voice shifted into the register she was learning to recognize. The one that wasn't CEO and wasn't even really persuasion, just honesty stripped of performance. "I know you don't want to be taken care of. I understand that. But there is a difference between taking care of you and making sure the building He paused. "Where you live is safe and functional. One is about ownership. The other is about the fact that Kofi sleeps in that apartment and I am not willing to watch him sleep in 2 sweaters because a negligent landlord won't fix a boiler." The silence stretched. "You were going to say something else," she said, "before you corrected yourself." A longer pause. "Yes," he said. She didn't ask what. She wasn't ready for what. "Thank you," she said instead. "For the heat. Anytime." The moment Bryce Calloway reappeared, Amara felt it before she saw him. It was the specific prickling at the back of her neck she'd developed at 21 that had never fully gone away. The body's memory of danger even when the mind tried to move on. She was leaving the engineering building, notes tucked under her arm, texting Jaewon about dinner, when a shadow stepped into her path and the prickling became a flood of cold. Bryce Calloway was 30 now. 3 years had added edges to him, sharpened the arrogance into something more deliberate. He was still classically handsome in the way that money maintained. Good skin, good teeth, a suit that said, "I was never in doubt about my place in the world." He stood blocking the path with the particular ease of a man who had never once needed to calculate whether someone might move him. "Amara Hayes," he said. She kept her voice level. "Calloway. I heard about your new boyfriend." He fell into step beside her, or rather beside her path, not giving her room to simply continue walking without a deliberate choice to push through him. Jaewon Choi, very impressive, pharmaceutical CEO. His smile was the kind that knew exactly what it was doing. "Interesting choice, given your history of..." What was it? Difficulty with boundaries. "I've never had difficulty with boundaries," she said. "Other people have difficulty respecting them." He chuckled. Like she was being charming. Like this was banter between equals. She had always hated his laugh. "Here's the thing," Bryce said, the smile staying, but the warmth dropping out of it entirely. "My father's trial is in 3 months. The last thing my family needs is any renewed attention on old complications. And you, with your new visibility," he glanced at her assessingly, "are becoming one. I haven't said a word about you to anyone." No, but he might. The pivot was smooth, inevitable. "Your billionaire is the type who plays long games. And I know the kind of information he collects, because I had someone look into him." He stopped walking. She stopped too, because not stopping felt like fleeing. And she had not survived 3 years of this to flee from Bryce Calloway on her own campus. "Here's what's going to happen, Amara. You end things with Choi. You sign a standard NDA confirming the terms of our..." A small pause, previous arrangement, meaning you had a brief personal relationship with me and both parties have moved on. "And you stay quiet through the trial." "And if I don't?" Bryce tilted his head. "Then I file for custody." The cold that moved through her was different from every other cold she'd ever felt. It started in her sternum and radiated outward, and she recognized it not as fear, exactly, but as the particular species of terror that only existed when someone threatened the thing you'd given up everything else to protect. "You don't want Kafi," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. "You've never even met him." "No," Bryce agreed. But the legal process alone, the filings, the hearings, the evaluations, those take time, and money, and attention. He studied her face, looking for the fracture. I'm not saying I'd win. I'm saying you'd suffer getting to the verdict. And honestly, Amara, can you afford the suffering? She didn't answer. 24 hours, he said. He turned and walked away, unhurried, his shoes clean on the wet pavement. And she stood watching him go with her notes clutched to her chest and her pulse hammering at the base of her throat. She called Jae-won before she'd reached the end of the path. He picked up on the first ring. I need to see you, she said. I'm already in my car, he said, like he'd been waiting for exactly this call. Where are you? The 43rd floor of Choi Biomedical's Hartwell City offices felt different from the ground floor reception, which had already felt significantly different from the world Amara occupied. Up here it was all glass and altitude, the city spread below like a diagram of itself. The desk Jae-won sat behind was clean, minimal, the kind of organized that said this man made decisions and then moved on to the next one. But he wasn't behind the desk when she arrived. He was standing at the window. And when she walked in and the door closed behind her, he turned and the expression on his face made her chest ache. Not with fear, not with the hardness she'd expected from a man who ran a corporation, but with controlled fury on her behalf. The kind of anger that had somewhere specific to go and was simply deciding the most effective route. Tell me exactly what he said, Jae-won said. Everything, in order, she told him. She sat in the chair across from his desk, and she told him everything, and she watched his jaw set with each sentence. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking at the middle's distance, running the calculations she could see moving behind his eyes. He's bluffing, he said. You can't know that. I can. He moved around the desk, not to sit. He didn't sit for the rest of the conversation. He moved, contained and precise, the way she imagined he moved through negotiations. His father's assets are frozen. The family legal team is stretched across 3 separate federal proceedings. A custody case requires sustained financial and legal resource he currently does not have. He stopped. More importantly, a custody case requires Bryce to submit to discovery. His behavior at Crestfield University. The complaint he filed against you, which I have documented as false. The payments he made. His jaw tightened. And the other women. She went still. What other women? Jae-won looked at her carefully. When I found out what he did to you, I looked into him. Bryce Calloway has a documented pattern. 3 other women. All from less protected backgrounds, all managed with the same combination of legal threats and financial settlements. His voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. None of them had anyone in their corner. Most of them took what he offered because the fight was going to cost them more than they could pay. Amara was quiet for a moment. He nearly got away with it, she said. Nearly. Jae-won's eyes met hers. But discovery in a custody case opens his entire history. He knows that. He's counting on you not knowing it. He paused. He's counting on you being the same woman you were 3 years ago. Alone, under-resourced, calculating whether you can survive the fight. She stood up. She walked to the window and stood beside him, looking out at the city. I'm not the same woman, she said. No, he said quietly. You're not. Below them, Hartwell City went on. The traffic, the rain that was just starting again. The ordinary machinery of a world that didn't know or care about any of this. She'd spent 3 years surviving that world. Learning its rhythms, its costs, its particular species of exhaustion. She was tired of surviving. She wanted to live. She wanted Kofi to have a mother who wasn't always one crisis away from the edge. She wanted to finish her degree and walk across that stage and build the things she'd promised her mother she would build. She wanted. And this was the terrifying part, the part she'd been refusing to name. She wanted the man standing 6 inches to her left. What do we do, she asked. Jae-won was quiet for a moment. We wait, he said. His family's implosion is already in progress. The trial in 3 months will do what no legal filing on our part could accomplish. Public, documented, irreversible consequence. He turned slightly toward her. But if he approaches you again, if he comes anywhere near Kofi, or if he files a single document, I will stop waiting. And the Calloway name will not survive what I know about it. She believed him. Not because it was a threat. She'd heard threats. She knew what threats felt like, but because it wasn't. It was a statement of fact, delivered by a man who dealt in facts, and the steadiness of it was more reassuring than any amount of heat would have been. She turned to face him. They were standing close. Closer than coffee shop close. Closer than dinner close. Close enough that she could see the way his expression changed when she looked at him directly. The controlled surface giving way to something she was starting to recognize as his actual face. The one underneath the CEO. The one he only showed her. I'm scared, she said. Just that. Just the truth. I know, he said. He didn't offer to remove the fear. He didn't promise it would be fine. He just said I know, and somehow that was better than the alternative. Because the alternative was a man who simplified what was real. And she had been simplified enough. Stay, she said, not asking him to resolve anything. Just asking him to be there the way he'd been there in the rain. Umbrella extended, proving himself incrementally, one small act of presence at a time. Jae-won Choi stepped slightly closer. Amara, he said, and his voice was low and entirely stripped of pretense. I'm not going anywhere, I told you that. I meant it. Not because you need me. You've been surviving without me for 3 years, and you would go on surviving without me. But because the version of my life that doesn't include you feels like a lesser thing. And I stopped accepting lesser things when I was 12 years old and decided the world owed me nothing, but I owed myself everything. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something she hadn't done with another person in 3 years. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder. Just that. Just her forehead and his shoulder, and the view of Hartwell City below them and the rain beginning to come down in earnest against the glass, and she breathed. Slow, controlled. But this time not because she was holding herself together, because she could afford to exhale. His hand came up slowly. She felt him decide it, felt the deliberateness of it, and rested against the back of her head, not pulling her in, just there, present. Okay, she said after a long moment. Okay, he said. Outside, the rain fell on Hartwell City, and for the first time in 3 years, Amara Osei didn't feel like she was standing in it alone. The thing about waiting for someone else's destruction was that it required a particular kind of discipline, not patience. Patience was passive. Patient was the woman who sat with folded hands hoping for the best. This was something else. This was Amara Osei going to class every morning and studying every night and kissing Kofi's forehead before he slept, and building her life brick by deliberate brick, while the Calloway family quietly, systematically came apart at the seams. This was choosing every single day to water what was growing instead of poisoning what was dying. Jae-won called it strategic restraint. Amara called it survival with better company, because that was what had changed. More than the heating in her apartment or the car she still felt guilty driving, or the way Miss Gloria now had a retirement fund and called Jae-won that lovely serious man with a warmth that made Amara's chest do complicated things. What had changed was that she was no longer doing this alone, and the weight of alone, she was only beginning to understand now that she'd set it down, had been immense. They talked every day. Not always long conversations. Sometimes it was a voice note at midnight when she was studying, and he was still in a meeting. Sometimes it was just a text. Sometimes it was him appearing at the diner near her campus on a Tuesday, with 2 coffees and 2 hours to spare, and the specific focused attention he gave to everything she said. Like her words were worth the full weight of his presence. He was learning her, not the file he'd assembled, not the surveillance photo and the investigator's report. Her. The way she stirred her coffee, counterclockwise, even though it made no practical difference. The particular quality of her silence when she was thinking through a problem, versus the silence when something had hurt her. She'd noticed him noticing the distinction, and it had unnerved her how quickly he'd mapped the difference. The way she talked about her mother. Not grieving exactly, more like someone carrying a conversation that hadn't ended yet, still reporting back. She would have liked you, Amara told him one evening. They were at her apartment, Kofi asleep down the hall, textbooks spread across the coffee table in the organized chaos of someone who studied the way other people breathed. She would have been suspicious of you first. She had a rule about men who were too good-looking, said they spent their whole lives being forgiven for things that should have consequences. Wise woman, Jae-won said. She was. Amara looked at her notes without reading them. She also would have wanted to know what you were afraid of. She didn't trust people who didn't have something they were afraid of. She said it meant they hadn't loved anything yet. Jae-won was quiet for a moment. Losing this, he said. Amara looked up. Before you, he said, not looking at her, looking at his hands, which was the only time he ever didn't look at her directly when he was saying something important. My life was functional, extremely functional. The company grew. The decisions were right. The outcomes were measurable. I was good at building things. He paused. I was not good at wanting things to stay. His jaw moved slightly. I didn't let myself want that. Wanting something to stay is a liability. Things leave. People leave. My parents left at 12, and the lesson was efficient and permanent. He finally looked up. And then there was you. And Kofi. And suddenly I have something I am genuinely afraid to lose. Which means I have something. For the first time in 18 years, I have something. His voice dropped. That terrifies me more than any board meeting ever has. The apartment was very quiet. Kofi's white noise machine hummed from down the hall. The city outside the window was doing its ordinary nighttime business, unaware. Amara reached across the coffee table and put her hand over his. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just let her hand stay there, warm and deliberate, and watched him look at it with the expression of a man receiving something he'd stopped expecting. "You're not going to lose this," she said finally, quietly. "Not if I have anything to say about it." His hand turned over under hers and held on. 6 weeks after Bryce Calloway's threat, the federal trial of Senator Gerald Calloway began. Amara watched none of it. She had an exam, a double shift, and a 2-year-old who had decided this was the week to resist all nap schedules simultaneously. The news came to her in fragments. A headline here, a notification there, Jaewon's occasional text that said things like prosecution called a second witness. Defense is rattled. She processed it at a distance, the way you process a storm that's happening 3 streets over. Close enough to matter. Far enough to survive. What she couldn't avoid was campus. The whispers had been circulating for weeks. Ever since her and Jaewon had stopped pretending their coffee was casual. She'd seen Sloane Calloway exactly once after the coffee shop incident from across the parking lot, and Sloane had looked at her with an expression that had moved through contempt, landed on something closer to fear, and then disappeared around a corner at speed. The rest of the campus had split into the 2 factions that formed around any woman who went from invisible to visible. The ones who were happy for her, and the ones who were not. The ones who were not had a consistent narrative. Gold digger, calculated, she'd targeted him. She'd probably manufactured the whole coffee shop's incident to get his attention. Because that was always the story, wasn't it? The woman who rose had to have cheated at rising. The woman who was chosen had to have manipulated the choosing. The idea that a man like Jaewon Choi simply saw something real and went after it with the same relentlessness he applied to everything else was not a narrative those people had room for. Amara had stopped listening to those people. Around the same time, she'd stopped letting Kofi's yogurt pouches be a budget line item she agonized over. Some things simply no longer fit in her life. What she wasn't prepared for was Derek Bruss cornering her again. This time it was the engineering building's stairwell, 2 weeks into the trial, and he looked worse. Not broken, not yet, but fraying at the edges in the way that expensive things showed wear differently than cheap things. Not tearing, exactly, but losing their shape. His suit was still immaculate, his eyes were not. "You did this," he said. Amara kept her hand on the stairwell railing. 3 floors down to the exit. She ran the calculation without being aware she was running it. She always ran it now, near him. "I haven't done anything," she said. "The leak." His voice had lost the smooth legislative cadence she remembered from their first encounter 2 weeks ago. The information about the women. It went to 2 journalists and a federal investigator simultaneously. That's not a random leak, that's coordinated. His eyes searched her face. "He did it, your CEO." She said nothing. Because she didn't know. Because she genuinely, truthfully did not know whether Jaewon had done it. And she had decided she didn't need to know. And she had made that decision consciously and without apology. "You ruined my family," Bryce said. "Your family ruined your family," Amara said. Her voice was steady. She was so tired of this man's inability to locate the source of his own consequences. "Your father made illegal choices. You made illegal choices. Those aren't abstractions, Bryce. They happen to real people. I'm one of them." She looked at him directly. "You threatened my son. My 2-year-old son, who has never done a single thing to you, who doesn't even know you exist. You threatened to drag him through a legal process to hurt me. You stood on a campus path and told me you'd use a child as a weapon." Her voice didn't shake. It never shook anymore. "Whatever is happening to your family right now, you should consider that before you come looking for someone to blame." Bryce stared at her. Something moved across his face that she didn't have a name for. Not remorse. Not quite, but maybe the earliest precursor of it. The moment before a person decides whether to feel something real or close the door on it again. He chose the door. She watched him choose it. "This isn't over," he said, reflexive, automatic. The threat of a man who had run out of actual threats. "Yes," Amara said. "It is." She walked down the stairs and out into the afternoon, and she texted Jaewon 2 words. "He's done." The reply came back in under a minute. "I know. Come for dinner tonight. Ms. Gloria has Kofi. I'm cooking." She stopped walking on the pavement outside and looked at that text for a long moment. "You cook?" she typed back. "I have a chef. But I will be present in the kitchen and will offer moral support." She smiled so hard her face hurt. "I'll be there at 7," she sent. He did not have a chef that night. He cooked himself, which meant the kitchen of his penthouse apartment. A space that normally looked like an architectural photograph was warmly, chaotically inhabited for the first time since she'd known him. There were 2 pots going and a cutting board covered in vegetables, and something in the oven that smelled like garlic, and something slow-roasted and expensive. He was in a gray t-shirt and dark trousers, and he looked for the first time in her experience of him slightly uncertain. Doenjang jjigae, he says, gesturing at the larger pot. My grandmother's recipe. It's the only thing she ever taught me that wasn't a lesson about discipline. He paused. Also rice, because rice is not optional, and some roasted vegetables, because I was informed by my CFO Min Jun that I need to eat more than protein and ambition. Amara set her bag down on the counter and looked around the kitchen. You did all this. It took 40 minutes and 2 phone calls to my grandmother for clarification on the paste ratio, he said. But yes, she looked at him for a long moment. This man who ran a $2 billion company and had made a woman who publicly humiliated her apologize in 30 seconds, and had bought her building and remembered which dinosaurus her son called a brachiosaurus. This man had spent his evening making fermented soybean soup from his grandmother's recipe because she was coming to dinner. Jaewon, she said. The paste ratio is critical, he said, turning back to the stove. My grandmother was very clear. Jaewon. He turned around. She crossed the kitchen and she kissed him. Not tentatively. Not the testing, careful kind of kiss that said maybe. The kind that said, I have been deciding this for weeks, and I'm done deciding. Her hands were on his face, and his hands came up to her waist, and he kissed her back with the same focused, absolute attention he gave to everything. Like she was the only thing in the room. Like the room was the only thing in the world. When she pulled back, his eyes were still closed for 1 second before they opened. The soup, he said. The soup can wait, she said. The paste ratio, Jaewon, is genuinely critical. I know you're deflecting because this just became real and it's scaring you, she said. It's scaring me too. That's fine. We can be scared. She kept her hands on his face. But I need you to know that I'm in this. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I'm in it. Not because you fixed my heating, or you drive me home in the rain, or you listen to my son explain dinosaur facts for 40 minutes without checking your phone. She paused. Though all of that matters. I'm in it because you told me you were afraid of losing this, and I believe you. And the last man I believed was Bryce Calloway, and he was nothing. He was a performance of a person, and you are not a performance. You are the most actual person I have ever encountered, and I am terrified of that, and I'm choosing it anyway. Jaewon looked at her. He looked at her, the way he'd looked at her at the bus stop apparently, the way he'd looked at her in the coffee shop, the way she was beginning to understand he always looked at her. Like she was the answer to a question he'd been carrying alone for a very long time. I love you, he said. Simple, clean, no architecture around it, no executive framing. I have loved you since a bus stop in the rain, and I know that sounds like the premise of something absurd. But it's the truest thing I know, and I don't say things I can't back up. She was not going to cry. She was absolutely going to cry. I love you too, she said, terrifyingly. Good, he said. Then we're terrified together. He turned back to the stove. Now let me finish this soup or my grandmother will know, somehow, across an ocean, that I dishonored her recipe. Amara laughed. The sound of it filled his kitchen, filled all that glass and altitude, and she heard it the way you sometimes hear your own voice from outside yourself. Surprised by it, moved by it, grateful for it. She had not laughed like that in 3 years. She went to stand beside him at the stove. Senator Gerald Calloway was convicted on 7 counts. The verdict came on a Tuesday, 12 weeks after the trial began, on a morning when Amara was in her pharmaceutical chemistry lecture and her phone buzzed twice in her pocket. She checked it at the break, 2 messages. One from Jaewon's, a single word, done. One from a news alert she'd set up on a whim 3 weeks ago, which confirmed it in 47 words. She sat in the hallway outside her lecture hall and she read the notification twice. And then she did something she hadn't let herself do in a very long time. She cried. Not the silent, functional crying she'd learned in hospitals and courtrooms, and late-night moments with a newborn when the fear of not being enough was loudest. Real crying, the kind that meant it was over. Bryce filed no custody claim. He had, as Jaewon predicted, neither the resources nor the credibility. The engagement to his society girlfriend dissolved within a week of the verdict. His name appeared in 2 of the witness testimonies in connection with the covered-up complaints. Not enough for charges, enough for everything else. The social exile, the professional retreat, the particular silence that follows a miffed fan who has finally been made to account for himself, even partially. The last Amara heard, he was somewhere mid-level and diminished and far from Hartwell City. Good, she thought. And then she stopped thinking about him entirely. Because there was too much living to do. The night Amara finished her final exam of the semester, Jae-won was waiting outside the building. Not the car, him. Standing on the pavement with his hands in his coat pockets and his dark hair, slightly disheveled from what she now recognized as his wind and impatience combination, which happened when he'd been outside more than 5 minutes. He was holding 2 cups of coffee that were already getting cold. 4 shots? She called across the pavement. Naturally, he said. She walked toward him and something settled in her chest that she was getting more practiced at identifying. Not relief, not quite, something bigger and quieter. The specific piece of approaching someone and knowing with your whole body that you are approaching someone safe. She took the coffee. She leaned up and kissed his cheek. Miss Gloria has coffee until 9, she said. I know, he said. I was thinking the lakefront. There's a good spot. I've been wanting to show you something. What? He smiled. The full one, the one that was only for her. Come and see. She took his hand. They walked toward the lake as the city hummed around them, ordinary and indifferent and entirely unaware that 2 people moving through it had arrived, finally, at a life that felt like it was theirs. Please, if you have gotten this far, comment where you're watching this from and subscribe to support the channel. The lakefront at night was a different city. Amara had lived in Hartwell City for 3 years, and she had never once come to this part of the lake. Not because she didn't know it existed, but because survival had a geography of its own. And survival's geography was bus routes and diner shifts and the 20-minute walk between campus and her apartment that she could do in 17 if Kofi was tired and it was cold. The lake had been background, something she passed on the highway and registered as beautiful in the way you registered beauty when you couldn't afford to stop for it. But this, Jae-won had somehow. And she no longer asked how, because the how was always either purchased or meticulously arranged, and usually both. Secured a private stretch of the waterfront. Not fenced off, not ostentatious, just a section of the path where the city noise softened, and the lights of the water took over. Someone had strung small warm lights through the trees that lined the embankment. There was a blanket on the low wall overlooking the water. 2 more coffees in a bag. The distant sound of the city, muffled and gentle, like a world considerate enough to lower its volume. Amara stood at the water's edge and let the night air move through her. This is excessive, she said. This is Tuesday, Jae-won said beside her. You did all this for a Tuesday. You finished your hardest exam of the semester on a Tuesday. He said it like it was obvious, like the math was simple. That warrants acknowledgement. She looked at the lights in the trees. She looked at the water. She looked at him. I've been so busy surviving, she said quietly, that I forgot this was a thing that happened. Just as being somewhere beautiful because you can. Because someone wanted to bring you here. She shook her head slightly. I forgot that was real. Jae-won was quiet for a moment. It's real, he said. And it will keep being real. He moved to stand beside her at the water's edge, close enough that their shoulders touched. I want you to know something. Whatever comes next. The degree, the research, the insulin initiative you're going to build, whether or not I'm helpful about it. A slight pause that acknowledged the ongoing, affectionate argument about her plans to disrupt his industry. None of that changes what I want. He looked at the water. I want to be there for all of it, not as a resource. As a person who chose you and keeps choosing you every day. Amara watched the light move on the surface of the lake. She thought about her mother, who had died never having been chosen like that. Who had given everything to a daughter and a series of jobs, and a body that failed her earlier than it should have, and who had never once stood at a waterfront on a Tuesday night with someone who strung lights through trees because she'd done something hard and deserved to be seen doing it. She thought about 21-year-old Amara, alone in a library being noticed by the wrong man, so hungry for being seen that she hadn't checked what he was seeing. She thought about the bus stop, the rain, an umbrella extended by a stranger who'd waited 3 years to finish the conversation. I want that too, she said. Simple. True, the kind of truth that didn't need architecture. Jae-won turned to look at her, she turned to look at him, and they stood there at the water's edge, not saying anything else, because some things are complete without conclusion. And this was one of them. The year that followed was the year Amara Osei learned what it felt like to run at full speed without looking over her shoulder. It felt like this. Waking up and the first thought not being money, not being threat, not being the complex triage of a woman managing everything alone. It felt like Kofi calling Jae-won by a name he invented himself. Not Dad, not yet, but Jay, said with the proprietary confidence of a toddler who had decided someone belonged to him. It felt like study sessions that ran until midnight without the weight of exhaustion that came from fear. Because exhaustion from work was different, it had a bottom, it ended. Whereas the exhaustion of fear had no floor. It felt like Min-jun, Jaewon's CFO and oldest friend, appearing at dinner one Sunday and looking at Amara across the table with an expression of profound relief and saying, "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for something to happen to him," gesturing at Jaewon, that he couldn't put in a spreadsheet. It felt like Ms. Gloria calling her on a Thursday morning just to say Kofi had learned a new word. Magnificent, from somewhere, nobody knew where, and was now applying it to everything including his breakfast. It felt like Jaewon in her apartment on a Wednesday night, on the floor with Kofi, both of them on their stomachs with dinosaurines between them, conducting what appeared to be a very serious diplomatic negotiation between the Brachiosaurus and the Triceratops. Kofi narrating in a mixture of English and sound effects. Jaewon responding in kind with a gravity that suggested this was the most important meeting of his week. She had stood in the doorway of that scene for a full minute before either of them noticed her. When Kofi saw her, he yelled, "Mommy, Jay says the Brachiosaurus is the most magnificent," using his new word with tremendous satisfaction. "He's right," Amara said, her voice entirely steady, absolutely nothing happening in her chest. Jaewon looked up at her from the floor, one dinosaur still in hand. And his expression was the unguarded one, the real one. The one she kept finding herself wanting to memorize so she could carry it around as evidence that this was happening, that this was her life, that she had not dreamed the whole thing. She had not dreamed it. She graduated on a Friday in May, summa laude, biomedical engineering. The University of Meridian's commencement was held outdoors, the kind of bright blue sky morning that felt almost aggressive in its beauty. And Amara sat in the third row with her name printed on the program, and her mother's voice, somewhere in the back of her mind, saying, "I told you. I always told you." Kofi was in the front row of the audience section with Jaewon on one side and Ms. Gloria on the other. She could see him from the stage when she walked across to receive her diploma. Could see his tiny, suited figure because Jaewon had taken him to get a suit, and Kofi had chosen it himself, and it was navy blue with a small bow tie, and he was clutching a handmade sign that read "Go Mommy" in enormous letters, painted with the kind of enthusiasm that had also gotten a fair amount on the kitchen table. She was crying before she reached the podium. She accepted her diploma from the dean and turned to face the audience, and found Jaewon's face in the crowd immediately, the way she always found him now. Not because he was the tallest or the most visible, but because her body had learned the specific coordinates of him, the precise location of safe. He was not crying. He was looking at her with an expression she could only describe as complete. Like everything up to this moment had been motion toward something, and this was the arrival. She cried through the rest of the ceremony. After the photographs and the reception and Ms. Gloria weeping with a dignity she maintained through sheer force of character, after Kofi had eaten 3 pieces of the celebration cake and fallen asleep against Jaewon's shoulder with frosting on his bow tie. After all of that, Jaewon took her back to the lakefront, the same stretch of waterfront. The same lights in the trees, because apparently he had arranged for the lights to remain as a standing installation. And when she had said that was absolutely absurd, he had said it was property maintenance, and she had let it go. Because choosing her battles was something she had also learned this year. The sun was setting over the water in extravagant color, gold and deep orange, and the particular rose that happened in that last minute before the light changed entirely. Kofi was with Ms. Gloria, who had waved them off with the specific authority of a woman who knew exactly what was about to happen and had strong feelings about witnessing it from a comfortable distance. Amara stood at the water's edge in her graduation dress. She'd changed out of the gown and felt the day settling around her. A good tired. The kind that came from something being completed, rather than something being survived. Jaewon stood beside her. He was quiet for a moment, which was unusual. He was precise with silence. He used it deliberately. And then he turned to face her. "1 year ago," he said, "you agreed to give me a chance, conditionally, with significant appropriate skepticism and a very clear set of consequences if I misused it." He looked at her steadily. "I want to know if I've been worth the chance." Amara looked at him. "You know you have. I need to hear it." Jaewon, Amara. His voice was stripped all the way down. No CEO. No controlled executive register. Just him. The actual him. The one who had been 12 years old and alone, and had built everything by himself, and was now standing at a lakefront asking a woman who had also built everything alone whether he had managed to become worth something to her. Please. Yes, she said, firmly, simply. You have been the best thing that has happened to me since Kofi. You have shown up every single time. You have loved my son. You have stood in the rain without a coat and bought buildings and made fermented soybean soup from your grandmother's recipe and sat on my floor conducting dinosaur diplomacy, and yes, you have been worth it. Every single day. Yes, he exhaled, and then he reached into the inside pocket of his coat. The box was small. Dark, navy velvet. He held it in both hands for a moment before he opened it, and she saw in that moment, in the slight unsteadiness of his hands, this man who was steady at everything, how much this cost him. Not the ring, the asking. The vulnerability of being the kind of man who had lost everything at 12 and built it all back and was now standing at a lake, holding a box and asking the universe to let him keep this one thing. The ring was extraordinary. A deep blue sapphire at its center, the color of deep water, surrounded by diamonds in a setting that was elegant without being loud. The kind of ring that said I paid attention to who you are, not who would impress other people. I know we haven't been together a conventional amount of time, he said. I know you have every reason to move slowly, and I have honored that, and I will continue to honor it in whatever form you need. His eyes held hers. But I also know what I want. I have known since a bus stop in the rain, and I have known with increasing certainty every single day since then. I want to marry you. I want to adopt Kofi, with his full understanding and consent when he's old enough to give it meaningfully. I want more children if you want them. I want to watch you build the Hayes Initiative. I'm already calling it that in my head, your name, your mother's mission. I want to watch you change an entire industry from the inside. And I want to be the person who is standing next to you when you do. His voice dropped. I want to be your home, Amara. The way you became mine without me even noticing until one day I looked up and realized I would not know how to locate myself without you. She was crying again. She had cried more in the last year, happy crying, than she had in the entire 3 years before it. She was going to need to recalibrate her relationship with crying. Yes, she said. I haven't asked yet, he said. Jaewon Choi, she said, through tears that were absolutely not undermining her delivery. If you don't ask me right now, I will graduate from biomedical engineering and medical research, and also patience simultaneously. He laughed. The full laugh, the warm one, the one that still surprised her every time, because it was so different from the controlled exterior the world got. And he went down on one knee on the waterfront with the lights in the trees above him and the sunset doing something magnificent behind him. And he looked up at her. Amara Ose, he said, will you marry me? Yes, she said. Absolutely yes. Get up. He slid the ring onto her finger and stood, and she was in his arms before he'd fully straightened, her face against his neck, his arms around her with the kind of certainty that felt structural, load-bearing, like something built to last. Behind them's the sun finished setting. The city went about its evening, and at the lakefront, with the lights moving gently in the trees above them, two people who had each spent years alone in the rain held onto each other and didn't let go. 5 years later, Dr. Amara Ose Choi stood at a podium. The auditorium held 400 people, researchers, executives, journalists, policymakers, the specific cross-section of the world that appeared when something was about to shift. She had prepared this speech for 6 months. She had rehearsed it until the words felt like breathing. She had worn her mother's bracelet on her left wrist beside the sapphire ring because some things needed to be present even when the person was gone. Today, she said, her voice carrying clean and clear to the back of the room, Choi Biomedical is launching the OCA initiative. She paused. Let the name land, named for my mother, Adidias Ose, who rationed her insulin because the cost of a life-sustaining medication in this country required a calculation no person should ever have to make. She looked out at the room, who died at 58 because she made that calculation for too long. The room was completely still. We are committing $400 million over the next decade to subsidize insulin production costs, eliminate price structuring that punishes low-income families, and fund research into next-generation delivery systems that reduce the cost of management by an estimated 60%. She paused. No family should lose someone they love to a disease they could have managed if management had been made accessible. That is not idealism, that is a solvable problem, and we are going to solve it. The applause started before she finished the last sentence. It built slowly, then all at once, the way real things always built. Not the performed enthusiasm of rooms that clapped because clapping was expected, but the kind that meant people had been waiting for someone to say this out loud and to do something about it. And here, finally, was the someone. She looked at the front row. Jae-won was watching her the way he always watched her, with that complete, full-weight attention that had unsettled her in a campus lounge 5 years ago and had never once wavered. Beside him, Kofi, 8 years old, sharp-eyed, already telling anyone who would listen that he was going to be a doctor, like his mother, was clapping with his whole body. The way children clapped when they were proud and had not yet learned to perform pride at a reduced volume. And on Jae-won's other side, in a dress the color of the sunset over the lakefront, sat their daughter, Patricia Grace Choi, 2 years old, named for a grandmother she would never meet, but whose life and death and love had built every single thing that surrounded her. Amara looked at her daughter. She thought about her mother, about that hospital room, about the promise she had made standing there with Patricia's hand going cold in hers. I will make something of myself. I will make sure this doesn't keep happening. She had kept the promise, both of them. Later that night, long after the gala and the interviews and the 1,000 small logistics of a day that had changed something, Amara found Jae-won on the penthouse balcony. He was looking at the Hartwell City skyline, hands resting on the railing, the city spread below him the way it had been, the night she'd leaned her forehead against his shoulders in his office and let herself exhale for the first time in years. She slid her arms around him from behind. He turned, pulled her in. "Regrets?" she asked against his chest. "Not one." His voice was low and certain, and she felt it as much as she heard it. "You?" She thought about the coffee on her face, and the bus stop in the rain, and the dark apartment with no heat, and the nights when she'd been so tired she'd sat on the bathroom floor so she wouldn't cry in front of Kofi, and had cried quietly into a towel instead. She thought about her mother, and about Bryce, and about 21 years old, and alone with $147 in a bank account, and a belief that she was reaching too far. She thought about an umbrella. "Not a single one," she said. Jae-won pressed his lips to her forehead, slow and deliberate and certain. "I told you," he said quietly. "From the moment I saw you, I told you. What did you tell me? That you were the answer." His arms tightened around her. "To every question I'd ever had the sense to ask." Amara Hayes Osei Choi, doctor, researcher, mother, wife, looked out at the city that had tried to make her invisible and had failed. She smiled against her husband's chest. She finally, completely, with her whole self, believed him. And that believing, was the most radical thing she had ever done.